Welcome to the Financial Coaches Podcast, where we talk about how to build your practice from startup to scale up while being the kind of coach your clients crave. Finally, a podcast for financial coaches. Here are your hosts, Maria Casillas and Cody Sizemore.
Hello and welcome back to the Financial Coaches Podcast. My name is Cody Sizemore and I'm joined here by my lovely co-host Maria Casillas. And today we have something that we were actually kind of chatting about very briefly right before we hit record. We were like, what are we going to be talking about today? And Maria brought up a pretty cool kind of concept that I think is really, really important. I think it's often, I don't know if it's overlooked, but it might be misunderstood. I don't know what the right phrase is. We'll get into it. But before we get into all of that, I want to do a few things. Number one, I just want to say thanks for listening today. Whether it be your first time today listening, we hope that you enjoy it. Whether it be that you listen to this show every single week, you are what we will call our every weekers, and we really do appreciate that. We want to give you guys a special shout out. And a really good way for you guys to connect with us would be through our Facebook group. And the Facebook group is called The Financial Coaches Community by New Money Habits. And it's something that I think it would actually be kind of cool is I know that we have a ton of every weekers. I know that for a fact, but it'd be kind of cool if you were to pop into that Facebook group and just make a post and say, hey, I am an every weeker. And then I think that'd be kind of cool, every episode that we do, or, maybe once in a while that we actually give you guys a shout out. By name, maybe even share your social media pages, whatever it might be. But I think that'd be kind of cool to give you guys a shout out and show some love to you since you guys are showing so much love to us every single week. So pop into that Facebook group, check it out, say hello, let us know that you're an every weeker, and the rest will be history. So with that being said, Maria, how are you feeling today?
I'm really good. Thank you. You're doing good too?
Yeah,
good.
Absolutely.
Wonderful.
Absolutely. So we were talking about this topic right before we hopped on, and we didn't talk about it too much because we were we'll save the good conversation for the recording kind of thing. But why don't
Time
you
efficiency.
fill the listeners in as far as what we were talking about and why you felt like you wanted to bring this topic up, because I do think it's important, but you have your own kind of perspective on that. So
yeah, I think the reason that I wanted to bring it up is because it has popped up in about 3 different ways in the last several weeks. And so oftentimes when that kind of thing happens, it's okay, maybe we should probably talk about this. It's just one of those signs, I think. So this whole idea is, what do our clients actually want? What do they actually need versus what they think they want or they think that they need? And so I'll tell you how it's come up, and then we can kind of unpack it a little bit.
Sure.
It has come up. I mean, it's one of those things that I've been saying for a really long time. And one of the ways that it came up recently was when we were talking about different marketing and the messages that we put in marketing. And I know you're a really great marketing genius, and so this is going to be old news for you. But it's that whole idea of when you talk to the audience, what we're trying to do is get to what it is that they want, right? And so as I and the other business partners at New Money Habits were kind of talking about what do our clients want, I just said, let's dig into a little bit, what do they think they want and what do they actually want? And so that's kind of where it had come up several weeks ago. And then I was reading a book that we were doing for our book club. It is called, I think, The Heart of Laser Focused Coaching. And I was reading through that, and sure enough, about 150 pages or so into the book, there is an entire section about understanding what your client says that they want, but digging a little bit deeper and really getting to the root of what's beneath there. And I was see, this is what I've been talking about for a long time. And then shortly after that, I had a client who reached out and was saying I've been working with this person on a very specific thing, but then she's this is what I'm thinking I actually want something different. And she asked for something that I have been sharing. That's kind of what she's been trying to get to at the bottom of that for a long time. And so it's just all 3 of those things kind of came together, and that's a beautiful little braid. And so I said,
it's almost
how about we talk about this?
Yeah, it's almost like you have to talk about it with that.
Right. That's right. Yes, exactly. So we need to tie the end of this braid for our listeners today. And I think it's a good conversation. I think what you had mentioned earlier, Cody, is that it's not necessarily overlooked, but I do think that a lot of times it is not really addressed. And I think that that's oftentimes because of a sense of maybe a little bit of fear from coaches, but I honestly think it's more a sense of like, I want to feel accomplished. Like I want something that's measurable. I want something that looks right. And so a lot of times we really try to help, I don't know, strategize maybe with our clients. And sometimes it's not really what they need. They don't necessarily need to know a strategy and how to get something done. We're just quick to jump to that conclusion because that's what they asked for. You know, they say, well, I need a plan for such and such. And we're like, okay, well, I can do that. I can help you strategize and create a plan. But that's going to really leave them wanting at the end of working with us if indeed we did not dig a little bit deeper and figure out what's making you want that plan in the first place? What are you actually after? And how can we kind of get to that? And so I think that's when I saw that in that book, I was like, oh yeah, like this is great. It gives certain examples of different questions that we can ask and what conventional, coaches will say versus how we can say this a little bit differently. So it's just some really good information. We're not going to be able to cover all of it today, obviously, but it's just a way to hopefully get some people to think differently.
Yeah. Yeah. So you mentioned that you've been thinking about this for a while and it's come up in a few different areas for you as well. So why don't you share, like some of the things that you have been thinking about with this?
Okay, sure. So I think when it comes to like the marketing side of things, I'm going to just throw this out there to you, Cody, and ask you I'm just going to say, what do you think? I think that a lot of times what people think they want, like when we're talking to our audience, you'll see a lot of promises about like a quick fix, someone to do the work for them, someone or something to fill a void, and quote unquote judgment-free zones. Mm-hmm. What do you think about that? Is that ultimately what you see being promised out there from a lot of people who are in our industry?
Yeah, I would say a lot of people, not everyone, of course, but there's a lot of people, not even in like the financial coaching industry, but even like kind of similar parallels to where like, you have like those gurus who will help you, start a side hustle, or, those gurus that will say like, hey, if you were to invest into this, this like real estate course, then I can teach you how to make $1 million in real estate within the first year, or, just something like that. Right.
Yeah.
That's where I see a lot of it.
Yeah. Or take this pill and lose 50 pounds in 4 minutes, that kind of thing. Yeah. So it's that quick fix. And I understand that. I understand that that's what we as human beings, we gravitate towards that. We're drawn to that because it's easy. It feels like it's something that we don't really have to put a lot of effort into. But when we kind of dig a little bit deeper, we realize that's not what we as human beings actually want. Like what we actually want is, a sense of accomplishment. We want to know that we can do something. We want to prove to ourselves that we're able to do that. We want a plan that's tailor-made to our specific circumstances and not something that's just like made for everybody. We want something that's custom made. And I think that that's something that anyone who says, here's this one pill that can do something for you, just to take it out of the context of money coaching for a second.
Sure.
You've got a completely different body composition. You've got different hormonal levels. You've got all these differences from the person next to you. Like there's no one pill that's going to be able to do for you what it does for everybody else. And that's why, we actually want something that will work for us. I think we also want long lasting results. And I think our clients want long lasting results. We say we want a quick fix, and there might be that sugar high, if you will. But then when that goes away, we're like, whoa, wait a minute, what's really happening? And I just think that as we're marketing to people, we want to actually think about what are some of the things that they truly, truly want. And that's really kind of hard because if it doesn't speak to what their base desires are, then are they going to click on what you're offering, right? So it's finding that delicate balance between like throwing out the line of here's what you think you want, here's what we're actually going to give you, and you'll feel better about that later. So we could talk about that in a marketing class later on, but that's kind of where some of the thoughts about it started coming up. So I'll pause there and ask for some of your thoughts on that before we go on to another.
Well, I agree with everything there. As you were talking, the one question that just kept going through my head, which I would imagine is also probably the same question that might be going through the head of the listeners, is, okay, I get the point that like, someone might say like that they want to get out of debt.
Yeah.
And that's, a measurable thing that you could kind of like, talk about and like you said, game plan on and stuff like that. But how do we actually figure out what the client actually wants? Like, what's the whole process of that? I have a hunch. I think it's actually pretty similar to something that I'm thinking about, but I want to hear from you first.
Probably. And that actually brings us to some of the examples from the book. And I hope you'll indulge me and allow me to read some of them for you because that, I think it just gives a really good example. And it's almost as if I asked you to transition there for me. I didn't, but this is why we do so well. So
we're pros.
That's right. I'm just going to say, it says on here, like, listen for what's underneath your client's request. So more often than not, there's something that they need that would help them long-term as opposed to giving them what they want in that moment. So the example that they use in this book, it's not about money. But that's why I like it, because it actually can it'll be a little bit easier for us to unpack. So it says, our client says, I want to figure out a way I can accomplish more each day. I just don't seem to get as much work done as my counterpart in a different department. And on here, the author says that the conventional approach would be to start with, how do you know that you aren't getting as much done as your coworker? He says, I listen to Sue when she talks about her work, and it sounds like a lot more than what I get done. What could be a way that you could get more accomplished? And then the client says, well, I suppose I could ... And what are they doing there, Cody? They're creating a plan, right? They're strategizing. They're figuring out how to make that happen. So in this case, it would be like, I think you mentioned getting out of debt. How do I do that? Like, how do you know you're not doing that well? And, so it would follow that same thing. But this approach says, instead of asking, how do you know that you're not getting as much done? It kind of repeats back to the client, I get that you want to accomplish more, and I wonder what makes that important for you. So it just kind of goes like, okay, we're not going to solve that yet. Let's find out what is making that important for you. It's a different way of asking why, by the way, which I absolutely love as well.
That's where I was going to go with this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly.
It sounds like it's similar to, finding someone's why statement, but maybe just a different layer to it.
Yeah. And that's another thing in this book. And we could talk about the lessons in this book all day, and so we won't. But one of the coolest things in there is trying to use as many what questions as possible. And as I was reading through this, I was like, that's kind of hard. I mean, you have to really be intentional to think out, how do I say what? And I'm like, there's no way they do that. And just as every question came up, it was so funny because I had to realize it doesn't mean you have to start every question with what, but the word what is actually embedded in almost every question that they follow through with. And so I'm like, I'm going to start practicing this with my kids and my spouse. And then maybe it'll come a little bit more naturally when it comes to clients. Okay. In response to what makes that important, the client said, I want to please my boss. I want him to be able to count on me to get my projects done. The coach then says, what might be some differences between your projects and Sue's? And then he lists several distinctions. And then the following question is, listening to those clear distinctions in the types of projects, what has you comparing your work to Sue's? And so again, it doesn't allow the client or the coach to fall into the trap of trying to solve the problems. It continues to just dig a little bit and find out what is important to you about comparing you to somebody else. And if we can get to the heart of that, now we're actually able to help them to change their trajectory, not just solve the problem in the moment. And if we can help a client change their trajectory, then they can actually be empowered to solve their own problems as they come up in the future, because they most certainly will.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like that. And you're right about asking the what questions, because I mean, if you're listening to this and you're like, someone who has coached a handful of people, you'll know that like, when you get to these a little bit more deeper conversations, it's very easy to ask the why questions, right? Mm-hmm. But the what questions, you're right. Like, you have to be very intentional with it. And I've even like experienced that myself with like my own clients and stuff like that. To where I've caught myself asking them why or how come or stuff like that. Mm-hmm. And I've just found that like sometimes when you ask a person why or how come or whatever it might be, it can kind of put them into a almost defensive like a defensive
mode.
Defensive kind of place. Yep. So the what questions I feel is really important to not overlook, because I think that that's something that can really, it can really help you kind of break through to another level with those clients.
Yeah, I agree 100%. The last thing I'm going to say on here, just reading directly from it, is it says, I've heard clients come to call requesting a strategy or brainstorming that could be helpful, although it might be tempting to brainstorm or come up with a strategy. Unless we address what's underneath, it will only be a short-term solution. So that's just a nice way that it summed up what we were just saying. And so I'm going to close that book and not read from it anymore. But I do think that that is something that shows up on a regular basis. And to share with you the client portion of this, where I've actually seen it in the last several weeks, is somebody that I've been working with who she really has no money issues. The reason that I'm working with her is for boundaries. And she's actually in the one in the family who has a lot of money. And because of that, a lot of the nieces and the nephews, probably, the ones who actually don't manage their money well seem to come to her often to ask for money. Yes. So her whole thing has been all about, like, how do I say no? What does this look like? And that kind of thing. And what we really have come to realize, and this is something that just through working with her in the beginning, I was able to see it very early on, but getting her to see it very early on was quite difficult, to be honest, because she wanted strategy. She kept saying, like, I want help crafting an email. I want to know, like, how do I say this, and how do I say no in a nice way? And so she was really looking for strategy. And so it kept going back to, like, what about this is so important to you? What makes you feel so drawn to giving to them, even though it's enabling your family members? And so we've really kind of gotten to the heart of some of this. And recently she sent me an email saying, I really want to shift focus when we work together now. I don't want it to be as much about some of the strategy, but really on myself a lot more. And I'm just like, oh, praise God. Like, we finally got there.
Yeah.
And so I think it's just kind of cool how that all comes together. And it's neat being the person who's kind of overseeing some of that and watching it unfold. But it can also be frustrating when you're like, you don't need strategy, hon. You need something different. Let's get there. And so that's just to say that even if you're really good at this, it can take a little while to get that, the client to understand that and to really want to get to that spot.
Well, I do think that it's worth noting that the fact that you knew that that's what she needed, even though it's not necessarily what she was wanting initially at first, I think that the very fact that she then came to you and then started asking for more of it, it just shows that, like, the work that you've been doing with her, even when it wasn't something that was very easy at first, especially to even just get her to kind of wrap her head around that, like, hey, this is actually something that might be beneficial to you. The fact that you just kept pushing and you stayed true to what you knew was important, and you focused on the root causes of things. That says a lot about you as a coach, and the rest of the guys at New Money Habits as well. And I think that's a big testament about, yes, we should give our clients the things that they want, but we shouldn't do it in the sense of sacrificing the things that they really need as well, even if it's hard to maybe see that for them in that moment of time.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm going to just reframe that in just a small tweak. It's not just the things they need, it's the things they actually want. And, True. Mike has said in the past, don't give up what you want now for what you actually want. And that, I think it's something along those lines. I'm probably misquoting him. But it's that whole idea of it's a surface want. So it's not just wants versus needs. It's wants versus actually wants. Like, what do we really want? And sometimes it takes us some time to really kind of figure that out. And I think that's important for us coaches to be able to help that person figure that out. And I appreciate you saying all that.
Yeah. Yeah, of course. Of course. So what are some ways that maybe someone could put this into practice? Like, if they were to try and do this, I know that we kind of talked about the correlation or similarities as to how this might tie into someone's why, but as far as like practical things to do to maybe like, maybe styles of questions to ask, maybe it's an exercise in particular that would really help kind of unlock this. What are some of those things that you found it to be helpful in those areas?
Well, I think, like you said, and like we mentioned before, the question itself is going to be really important. So allowing ourselves to not fall into the trap of just jumping to rescue our clients, jumping to help solve a problem right away. So, a silly little tactic might be to, on a Post-it note, write the word "what" and post it somewhere so that it just reminds you to start asking that question in a way that uses the what somehow. And you're still reflecting back to them what they're saying. And also, like, what about that is important to you? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that's just one small little thing.
That's a good one.
I also think that doing a personal exercise to figure out what you want, I know I might be going like a little off the rails, but I think that that's actually important, because if we can do our own reflection and figure out, what do we say we want? Like, what do we, in our moments, like, what are we like, oh, I wish the house was clean. I know that's for me. Like, I want a clean house. Okay. So if I get a clean house, then what? Am I actually going to be content? Oftentimes, no, because it's not the house that's clean. You could bring in a cleaning lady and they clean the house for you. But if I haven't gotten to the root of what's going on, not just the root of what I actually want, but the root of how it doesn't stay clean, then it's not going to stay clean for very long. And then I'm going to be back where I was started to begin with. So I want more consistency in cleaning. I want more help from people around the house. Like, actually figure out what is it that you're really, really craving. So that way you can solve some of that problem instead. So we can't really do for others what we can't do for ourselves. And we can help them see things that we aren't really good at. So don't think that I said, just because you're not perfect that you can't help other people. That's not what I said. But if we can't go through the process of figuring out what's important to us, then we're going to have a hard time really digging with that, digging through that with our clients.
Yeah. I want to double down on that and just say that some of the best teaching points that I have, some of the best exercises that I do, and some of the best just like insights that I might be able to share with my own clients have come from personal experience, and me basically doing things to and for myself as well. Yeah. So, if you're listening to this and you're like, this is a really good point. I do see the value in this. I do see how this could really benefit my clients. I just don't know how to do it exactly, or I don't feel confident in doing it. Do exactly what Maria said. Just like do it to yourself. Maybe even sit down with your spouse if you have a spouse, and maybe try it on them or whatever it might be. And it can be about anything, like you said. Like, it doesn't have to be just about money. The same principles apply. But get some reps under your belt. See how it feels for yourself, and then you'll be able to feel more confident, going into this with someone else, such as a client. So, yeah,
I agree. And I think that the release of this is going to be really close to the end of the year. And it's really around the time that people start talking about goal setting and, all of their New Year's resolutions, et cetera, which oftentimes don't even work. So I would encourage people, as you're seeing some of this, ask yourself, when I go into this new year, how is it that I want to be able to set these goals? And so if it's something that you're looking to do, try some of this on yourself to realize, what is it that I actually want to do? What do I want to accomplish? Because a lot of times we just sit down and do, well, I want to make this specific amount of money, or I want to do this. And so we set a plan, we set a strategy to make that happen. And I think part of the reason that so many times it goes to the wayside by January 17th or something like that is because it's not rooted. It's not rooted in what we actually want to do. And so I encourage you over the next couple of weeks to really start thinking about, what about this thing is it that I actually want? What am I actually seeking with this? If I say I want more money in my business, what am I going to do with it? Like, what's the purpose of that? What makes us think that we want more money? What makes us think that that's even something that we should be looking for? So just kind of those kinds of questions to ask yourself as you move into this next year. And I actually would like to do like almost like a part 2 with you, Cody, if we could. But just the idea of like, how do you measure the success of some of that? And we can maybe talk about that next week. But just getting into a different way of looking at how we set goals, not just for ourselves, but for and with our clients as well, because I have a feeling that they're going to be coming to you because they're going to set some resolutions, and this is going to be our chance to help them with that.
Yeah, I'm glad that you brought that up, because there's even something that kind of shifted for me in my own life that we could definitely talk about that. So
awesome.
We'll save that. We'll leave this on this note, so there's a little bit of a cliffhanger for the listeners. Sorry,
Stay
guys.
tuned.
You have to wait till next week. But yeah, we'll talk about that next week.
Okay.
But until then, anything else you want to say as we wrap things up? Maybe one key takeaway.
Oh gosh.
I'm putting you on the spot. I
know a lot. Like this whole episode, you put me on the spot, and that's okay. I welcome it. I think the key takeaway is that you're never going to do this perfectly. That's probably a little different than what you were going for. But I can tell you from personal experience that I've been practicing this for a long time. And even as I started reading through this, there were so many places where like, oh, I need work on this and I need work on that. And I need to try this and I want to shift this and I want to tweak that. And I just want to say that you're never fully arrived. And if you think you're fully arrived and you're in the moment where you're like, I can just stop learning, then you're going to stop being effective for people. So for me, that was the biggest takeaway over the last several weeks and months. Like I said, as some of this braid started to come together and I was able to say, okay, you have good insights and yet we still need to practice this thing over here. So it's never fully done.
Yeah, that's a really good one. Really good one. So take that as you will, let it sink in, and we'll talk more about this next time, but you're going to have to wait till next week. So sorry, not sorry, but it's going to be a fun one. Until then, you guys enjoy your holiday, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you for listening to the Financial Coaches Podcast, brought to you by New Money Habits and Sizemore Financial Coaching. Submit your questions to our hosts by emailing podcast@newmoneyhabits.com. Be sure to subscribe to be notified of future episodes and join our growing group of like-minded coaches on Facebook. And until next time, happy coaching. Music provided by Summer School.